Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Our long national nightmare is over. The Houston Rockets have won a basketball game. The 13-game losing streak, the worst by any NBA team in the 2022-23 season, is no more. With that, of course, we've got to have a podcast to talk about it and actually have some fun for a change. It hasn't been great watching this basketball team over the past month or so with everything hovering over this franchise. But I think at least for one Monday night in late January, there's something to celebrate. So that's what we're going to do today on Tuesday's episode of The Lager Line, the show served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing. As always, I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. Today, as we break down Monday night's 119-114 win over the Minnesota Timberwolves, the win that finally stopped the long Rockets losing streak, I'm joined by Paulo Alves, our co-host and producer out of Portugal. Paulo, I know you've been Team Tank for a lot of this season. The Rockets do have to consider their odds when it comes to Wemby and Scoot and everything that could be in the 2023 NBA draft. But from time to time, you've got to get some wins just to keep the vibes going. And that win last night overall was a pretty good one, right? Especially with Jalen Green going for a career-high 42 points.
I was expecting you to ask me how things were going because, dude, I already had the answer ready and everything. I'm going to pretend that you asked it, and I'm just going to say, listen, right now, I'm feeling pretty bad because, Jalen Green drops 40 every other game and then goes back down to 10 for the in-between games, and we're currently, looking at an in-between game against Washington tomorrow. So right now I'm really bad, but after the game tomorrow, I'm going to be really high again because he's going to drop 40 on Evan Mobley and the Cavs again. No,
That's true. Yeah, it's the Evan Mobley showdown on Thursday. So if he keeps on this every other game 40-plus pace, then yeah, he's dropping 40-plus on Evan Mobley Thursday night. You heard it here first.
The agendas will be thriving. No, but you were asking about the tank, right? Okay.
Right.
I'm pro tank, and people have thrown this at my face on Twitter when I celebrate wins. I'm pro tank in certain circumstances, right? I've always been of the opinion since the beginning of the season that if you're winning because Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun and Tari Eason and Tari Smith, they're carrying you to wins and they're making progress and that's why you're winning, then that's totally fine because the small odds increase that you get from tanking does not outweigh the progress of the player that you already have in-house. And so last night's game was basically perfect. I mean, Jalen had, his 42, 4-4. Alperen Sengun at 21, 7-7. The third best scorer was Eric Gordon, but he didn't even have that good of a game. But you had a great game from Tari Eason. Obviously, Jabari Smith is hurt. KPJ is hurt, but it was a win that was very much carried by the young guys. And to me, that's all you can ask for. The only wins that are frustrating to me will be either when we're really close to the end of the season and if one singular win alters the lottery odds and makes it, so we are not the team that gets Wemby or score or something like that, that would probably be kind of sad. But other than that, the only wins that kind of trigger me are if you're winning because Garrison Matthews is going off or Eric Gordon's going to drop 30 or something like that. If you're being carried by the vets,
Yeah.
I know it's kind of picky and it's kind of artificial to say this, but it's just how I feel about the wins and losses.
It's not like the Texans-Colts game in the final week of the NFL regular season where you drop from number 1 to number 2 solely because the quarterback who is being replaced takes you to a win that you had no business winning. It's not like that. And in this case, we should point out that the Rockets 11-36. Look, they've still got a 3-game buffer between themselves and the Spurs, who are at number 4. And if you're in the top 3, at the moment, the Rockets are still number 1 for the worst record, a floor of pick 5. But as long as you're in the bottom 3 teams, you still have the maximum possible odds at picks 1, 2, 3, and 4, which, of course, what we're really focusing on is pick 1 and pick 2, Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson, when it comes to getting one of those generational prospects. And the Rockets still have a 3-game buffer over the Spurs on that front. So it's 1-1. At some point, there could be some hard decisions to be made, but we're almost to the trade deadline anyway. And so the way I look at it, Paolo, is some of these considerations are going to probably take care of themselves anyway, because February 9th is really just over 2 weeks away from when we're now recording this, and then the All-Star break after that. And then the season sort of shifts at that point anyway, because teams in the Rocket shoes tend to go a lot younger. They sell off their veterans, and the All-Star break, when you have a week to sort of take stock of where you are and go through some practices, that's when you go through more of a transition that's probably going to make you more likely to lose games anyway, right?
Yeah, and speaking of the trade deadline, just a couple of quick references, because in the in-between time, but after last pod and before this one, there was the Rui Hachimura to the Lakers trade, and that generated a couple of thoughts on just Rockets community on Twitter that I'd like to address really quickly. The first one is, guys, not all second-round picks are built the same. The report came out that the Rockets got offered 4 first-round picks, 4 second-round picks, I'm sorry, for Eric Gordon from the Milwaukee Bucks. Guys, Lakers second-round picks are not the same thing as Milwaukee Bucks second-round picks. Second-round picks are worth something. I'm not going to go as far as saying, they're worthless. No, but second-round picks beyond 50, perhaps 55, which is surely what those Bucks picks would be, are basically worthless. We see them getting sold out just for cash considerations all of the time. The difference between the 55th pick and the guy you're going to get undrafted usually is basically none. If you go back and watch the guys that get drafted in that range, they're either draft and stash guys, or guys are just complete projects that barely make it, if at all. If I asked you to name, just in this last draft, picks 55 through 60, well, 2 of them were forfeited because of the Bogdan Bogdanovic tampering and the Kyle Lowry tampering violations.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than that, I bet you if you were able to name like 1 or 2 of those guys, it will probably already be fairly impressive. And then the other thing is, I know people are mentioning also that they would have liked to take a shot at someone like Rui Hachimura, and I for the most part agree. In the rebuild, you want to take shots at these players that are just coming off of their rookie contracts and their past teams don't want to pay them. And you, as a rebuilding team, that's a way of getting a sense of how much a guy is worth, or if he's if he fits on your team before you eventually make an offer for him in free agency. These kind of I call it recuperation projects. I don't remember the exact word for it, but
the reclamation project.
Yeah, exactly. It's close enough. But Rui Hachimura in specific is not one of those guys. We have Rui Hachimura is a perfectly average prospect at basically everything. He has a little bit more shot creation than a 3-and-D wing, but he's also not as good of a shooter or of a defender as a 3-and-D wing. It's one of those, kind of connector pieces, kind of like Deshaun Tate, with way worse defense and a better shot. So one of those guys, he's just perfectly average at everything, and we're in a league that rewards, other than star players, rewards specialists. And we currently have Jabari Smith Jr., Tari Eason, KJ Martin, and Deshaun Tate. Deshaun Tate more in the Rui Hachimura, sector of those. But guys that project to be specialists and project to be better at shooting and at defense than Rui would be. And so it just makes more sense to just bet on those guys. We're already struggling to give those guys enough playing time. It just really doesn't make sense. As cheap as Rui Hachimura was, 2-3 second-round picks, just doesn't make sense, because you're just adding onto the roster currently, and you're likely going to do it to an even further extent come the offseason.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to get into Tari Eason in just a few moments, but honestly, this team needs to sell off or to consolidate much more than it does to add. It's much more at this point about quality than quantity. They already have quantity. What they need to be doing is opening up more minutes for the young guys that they're trying to develop. So be it selling off or doing a 2-for-1, something along those lines that shortens the rotation, especially at the wing spots. You can potentially add a point guard, and I think that's something that fills a need that they can't really do internally at the moment. But in terms of, the wing/forward positions, they're already pretty deep there. If anything, you need to consolidate. Adding on is just going to further make worse this issue that you already have as the roster is currently constructed. So I'm right there with you. I don't see it as a huge mess, and the emergence of Tari Eason definitely contributes to that. We'll get into that in a few minutes when we break down his game. But I think the place to start needs to be with Jalen Green, because he is clearly the top asset in your entire organization right now. And when you look at the macro, the season as a whole, his regression compared to year one with regards to his efficiency, it's a huge storyline. Really, it goes back to the last week of November. We talked about it plenty on this show that the first 20 games, there was lots to like about Jalen's performance. And then, whatever reason, starting the very end of November, it started going in the wrong direction. And for Jalen, that's the one guy on this roster that you can conceivably see the way it's constructed right now as potentially, if you squint hard enough, he's not nearly there right now, but potentially the lead option offensively on a contender a few years from now. There's a long way to go, but you can certainly see the talent. It's there. And so any uneven play from him is going to draw a lot of attention, because even at 20 years old, he is why you watch this awful team that is the 2022 to 2023 Houston Rockets. He is the draw. He is what gives you more than anybody hope for a better tomorrow. And so seeing some slippage from him, it's concerning. We need to talk about it for sure, especially if it comes at the same time that a guy like Evan Mobley, who he's going to play on Thursday night, is starting to come on for the Cavaliers. Mobley had a big game the other night, and of course that drew plenty of discussion on Twitter, as you would suspect, given the downturn not just for Green but the Rockets as well. With all that said, we are starting to see, not just with that 42-point career high outburst on Monday, but really going all the way back to when Kevin Porter Jr. left on January 11th in Sacramento, an upturn in performance by Jalen. And perhaps it's the start of getting back to those first 20 games, or getting back to the way he finished last year in the second half of the season and figuring it out, getting his second wind, whatever you want to call it. I forget who it was, but somebody made the point on Twitter last night that this is the most basketball that Jalen Green has ever played, because his first season, if you recall, he missed about a month or more than that with the hamstring injury in the first half of the year. So perhaps just physically, it's a lot to put on his body as well. And now he's breaking through that wall, the way a lot of people like to call it. Whatever the reason, ever since Kevin Porter Jr. went out, the last 7 games, although it's 6 for Jalen because he missed that one game due to the suspension, the silly rule about briefly leaving the bench. So the last 6 games, and the reason I'm including the January 11th game, Kevin Porter Jr. did play, but it was only 10 minutes before he left with the foot injury, has not returned. Starting with that game in Sacramento, Jalen Green's averaging 28.2 points per game, 3.5 assists, 3.5 rebounds, shooting 46.9% from the field, 38.6% from three-point range. So yeah, more than 28 points per game on nearly 47% shooting and 39% on threes. That is damn good. And in 2 of his last 3 games, he's broken 40, including the 42 he had, a career high in Monday night's win over the Timberwolves. Thought it was great to see him bounce back against Anthony Edwards after, at times in Saturday's loss to the Timberwolves, Anthony just bullied him, and the script completely flipped on Monday. And it wasn't just that Jalen Green scored 42, it was that he did it efficiently. Edwards had 6 turnovers. Green had just 1 after having 6 himself on Saturday. Jalen made 15 of his 25 shots, 5 of 10 from 3. So 60% overall, 50% on threes, as efficient as you could get. He does need to get better from the free throw line. He's only shooting 69% in this stretch that we're referencing, which is definitely not nice. Just 6 of 10 last night, including a couple of misses late in the game when they were trying to put it away. So he does need to get better there. But the other thing that we should point out too, while this is just the first win for the Rockets in this stretch, they have been getting more competitive. The previous 3 losses to the Lakers, the Hornets, the Timberwolves, 2 of those on the road, all by single digits, and then the win by 5 against the Timberwolves on Monday. So is it anything to get super excited about? No, but for a team that's 11-36 and at the bottom of the NBA, they are getting more competitive. So in terms of breaking down what has shifted for Jalen over this stretch, besides the obvious answer of he's making more shots, they are running the offense more through Alperen Sengun than Kevin Porter Jr. now, and I'm sure that plays into it. But for me, the most staggering statistic when I look at this KPJ list stretch The Rockets are now 7th in the NBA in pace over that period. Prior to these 7 games, they ranked 18th. In the month of December, they ranked 24th. Playing with pace is so beneficial to this team because it plays to the strengths of this young athletic group, and especially Jalen Green. He is the most talented player, and for the most part, the Rockets go as Jalen Green goes. When you think of their highlight games this season for the Rockets as a team, for example, the big wins they had in early December against the Bucks and the Sixers, also that come from behind they had in Phoenix where he dropped 30, most coming in the second half. All of those were big games for Jalen Green. This team goes as far as he can take them. And so playing with pace and getting out and running, that plays to Jalen Green's skill set, and it sort of mitigates his deficiencies when it comes to isolation heavy play in the half court when it becomes a slog. And I don't want to say his lack of a handle, but his inconsistent ability to get regular separation and the lack of physicality on his drives, that can be a bit more of a factor when it's a slog, as opposed to when he can get out and run. That's when his style of play is especially lethal. And that's something that they've been able to do a lot more, running the offense through Sengun rather than KPJ the last 7 games. Now, the counter to all of that, and this has been made on the Rockets broadcast, where they are clearly worse without Kevin Porter Jr., they don't really have a go-to guy late in games when inevitably things get sticky in the half court, the situations we were just discussing. Kevin Porter Jr. is definitely the best option on this Rockets team when it comes to taking you home. We've seen it a couple of times this year, just making the difficult shots down the stretch of a game. Who's just going to go out and get a bucket one-on-one? The thing is, while that's true, this team is so bad in those situations in terms of the way they're constructed and how young they are that it just doesn't really matter that much anyway. Even if Kevin Porter Jr. is your best option in the half court when it's close in the fourth quarter, that's not really the formula for how this team can win anyway. So I think that's why, even though they don't really have that guy, it's not that much of a loss. And some of this is not on Kevin Porter Jr. Some of this is on the coaching staff. I want to make clear, Kevin Porter Jr. has some skills that can absolutely translate to the way they have played over the last 6 or 7 games, which has been much more watchable. He's a great catch and shoot guy. He can create his own offense. But I think the overarching theme that the coaching staff needs to be drilling into these guys, and if someone isn't following this edict, then make a change. Play with pace. There was a stat the Rockets put out, to circle back to the numbers, as I was saying when I led off this little tangent. The Rockets had 20-something turnovers last night, but the Rockets are actually 7-7 this season when they have 20 or more turnovers. They are 4-29 when they are below 20 turnovers, which sounds stunning. And, I'm certainly not saying that they should try to have more turnovers. No, of course not. But what I do think that reflects is that when they have 20 plus turnovers, many times it happens because they are pushing the pace that inherently leads to a few more turnovers because you're trying to get out and run. And it also leads to just more possessions in general because you are getting out and making the game quicker. You're getting the ball back more rapidly. And so that's inherently going to give you a few more turnovers because you just have more possessions to go around. And eventually that adds up. But I think the bad of a couple extra turnovers is far outweighed by the good of playing to the skill sets of these guys. So beyond just the fact that Jalen is making more shots and he is starting to make more threes, that's always a great sign. Jalen has continued as a volume 3-point shooter. You've talked about that before. That's very important for his player archetype to be as efficient as he needs to be when it comes to true shooting and that kind of stuff. Getting to the line, shooting threes at high volume. The fact that the 3-point shot is coming back around, that speaks to the work he's put in on the practice court with the coaches, and he's sticking with his routine. He's not getting sidetracked by the struggles. That's a good sign. But beyond simply the ball going in the bucket, to me, the biggest thing that I can see, and of course the obvious shift to going through Sengun, is that they are really getting out and running a lot more. They are playing to Jalen's strengths, and that pace really feels like the biggest thing that has changed relative to the stretch before KPJ went out, which also happened to be the 20 games that Jalen Green was really, really poor. Does that make sense to you? What do you attribute this, recent rise by Jalen Green to where he's now averaging, again, over 28 points per game on strong efficiency over his last 6 outings?
Yeah, I think with Jalen, a lot of it is just being consistent in the way you take your shots. His shot selection just varies wildly depending on the game. And to me, that a big part of that is it's coaching. He can take and make any shot on the floor, but it's important for him to realize when it's warranted to take a tough shot and when it's not. One of his signature moves coming out of the G League was driving. If the help comes, he drifts baseline and goes for a mid-range shot. That's cash for him. At least from the height test. I don't have the shot chart with me. That's a shot he only takes when he's confident. And with him, for example, he's so heavily tied. He made this point as well. He's so heavily tied with when this team wins or not. This team has won 11 games so far this season. I have them in front of me. I'm going to give you the number of points Jalen has had in those wins, and the number of shots that he's taken in those wins. 24 points on 15 shots, 26 points on 17 shots, 28 points on 19 shots, 17 points on 15 shots. This is the one outlier in this entire list of games. 27 points on 20 shots, 34 points on 18 shots, 25 points on 16 shots, 30 points on 17, 30 points on 21. 42 points on 25, 30 points on 24 shots, right? This team can only win, basically, with the exception of one game, if Jalen is scoring and if Jalen's being efficient. And efficient has different definitions. There are games in this stretch in which he wasn't shooting well from three. But to make up for that fact, he was getting to the line at an insane rate, which is really important for him. And that's part of the point that I was going to make. His free throw shooting has been fairly poor in recent games. 6 of 10, 3 of 6, and the team in general. Even Sengun, I think, since KPJ has gotten hurt, I think he's shooting 50-something percent, 53%. I have it in front of me, 53% on free throws. In games, we're losing by 5 points, 9 points, 5 points, 8 points. A lot of them are simply free throw discrepancy, and these guys are better free throw shooters than this. But to Jalen's credit, he is making a lot better of a job, and this has been a trend the entire season of getting to the free throw line when his shot's not falling, with the exception of the games, and this is my next point, with the exception of the games where he just doesn't care. It's just the truth. There are games where Jalen Green doesn't care on defense and on offense, and although he has the offensive stats that you brought up, defensively, with the exception of last game, which he made a noticeable effort to at least stay in the play, right? Some of the contests were contests from behind, from trying to fight over the screen. D'Lo went off, but D'Lo was just hot, to be fair. I mean, there's not much Jalen could have done in some of those shots, but his effort has been really, really poor. So much so that me, someone who wanted Jalen Green over Evan Mobley in the draft and praised him for his work ethic, I was advocating for, if Jalen's not going to give the effort that he needs to give, or not even close at this point, he needs to be benched, because these players need to be held accountable. A part of the reason why Sengun's made strides on the defensive end and is now, the guy that people see him as, is because he was held accountable throughout the entire process. He is still held accountable. He sometimes sits Alperen Sengun after a bad mistake. People often mention that Alperen Sengun is held to a higher standard than the other young guys. Steven Salas had the completely bogus comment earlier this week about the difference between Alperen Sengun last year and this year is that last year he was trying to score, and this year he's trying to score quickly or make a pass, which is completely detached from reality, because if anything, he was a more willing passer last year. He's clearly held to a higher standard, and his play and his improvement reflects on that. Or that reflects on his play and his improvement. What's incorrect isn't the fact that Sengun is held to a higher standard than the others when he should get the leeway that the others do. No. What should be happening is the other guys are being held to the same standard Sengun is being held to. Mm-hmm. Because as we said, it's a fine line between being an elite scorer and being a chucker, both offensively and defensively. And we need to make sure Jalen Green does not become a chucker or an inefficient scorer, or what people like to call the most common example usually is Jordan Clarkson, which is not really fair because Jordan Clarkson has been efficient the last couple of years, but still, Jalen Green needs to be held accountable for his defense. There was a clear difference last night where he was still getting cooked by D'Lo, and he was still making some really poor decisions on defense.
Agree.
But those were those were the same decisions everybody else is making that are poor. The entire overhelping thing, the overreacting to any level of threat. Even Tari Eason, who is a good defender, even Jabari Smith is doing that. So you can attribute that to Jalen, but the effort was there. And in scramble situations, after, when he's not the one primarily over helping on the drive, or when when he is recovering. I saw a couple of plays last night when he made the correct where he made the correct read. He saw a guy driving, and instead of chasing, he was already beat, right? And instead of chasing after him, he went straight away. He went straight to the corner shooter. I saw a couple of plays like this last night. That's great. That's in the moment, making the decision and making the correct read instinctively. And that's outside of whatever system they have, because after you're in scramble mode, it's mostly instincts. He also had that effort block on D'Lo in clutch time on that three. Now, defense is not based on highlights, obviously, but I'm fairly confident when I tell you that Jalen Green's not making that block in any of the past 10 games because he wasn't trying hard enough, and he got a fingertip to the ball.
That block was when I knew they were winning that game. That was the attention to detail, the kind of play you make when you are desperate, which they said post-game. That was the word that multiple guys used. Jalen, Tari Eason, desperate. When he made that rotation and got to that ball, that was the type of play that they have not made really for 90% of the season.
Yeah, and to address one last thing before I hand it back to you. You mentioned Kevin Porter Jr. And on Twitter, people are going back and forth, as they always do, with the agendas of some people, are mentioning what you said because they don't like KPJ. And some people are, attacking those people because they do like KPJ too much. And the truth is, and we've talked about this, KPJ has the tools and the skill set to be an incredible off-ball guard. He's one of the best catch-and-shoot shooters in the league. He has plus playmaking ability. He is a good ISO guy down the stretch. He is perfect for you to run your system, and you can throw him the ball in the clutch if need be. I do disagree with you on your point about them needing him in clutch time. Because, yes, they do need him, because Steven Silas can only run an offense through the perimeter. Because, in actuality, if you wanted an ISO guy to score, you should throw the ball to Sengun, because he's by far our most efficient ISO scorer. But they do have a guy that just don't use him. But, considering that we run a mostly perimeter-oriented offense, they do miss.
I guess it's within that context, yeah.
Yeah, within that context, they do miss KPJ. And it begs the question, and I know we're still have a couple other players to talk about, but it begs the question: when KPJ comes back, are they going to revert back to what the offense was before? Because if they do, I mean, I've already been hopeless with this coaching stuff for a long time. But if they do revert after seeing what we're seeing, after seeing the production that Alperen Sengun is having, after seeing how much better it is for Jalen Green. Not only does he get more on-ball reps, but he gets more off-ball reps as well, because you're generating dribble penetration, and Alperen Sengun is actually generating advantages, which leads to more opportunities for Jalen to do what I mentioned last podcast, which is relocating after, the defenses collapse, getting, more catch-and-shoot opportunities, more off-ball opportunities. It's easier to give him more off-ball opportunities if someone else is creating an advantage.
Yeah, let's actually go into Sengun a bit now. I know we said we were going to do some stuff on Tari Eason, and we'll get to it. But I think the Jalen discussion lends itself to an analysis of Sengun simply because so much of Jalen's recent progress has come in this same period that you've given Sengun a bigger role. I thought the tweet from Matt Moore yesterday, and my suspicion is that he was probably just trolling a little bit because Jalen had that bad game on Saturday in Minnesota, but Matt tweeted Jalen Green's slump coming in correlation to the emergence of Sengun is either interesting or completely and totally random and unrelated. That was a really bizarre tweet because, as we mentioned earlier, since Sengun took on a bigger role, that's actually when Jalen has finally snapped out of his funk that had traced back to basically the end of November. So if anything, it's the emergence of Sengun has given more opportunities to Jalen Green. Nathan Fogg ran the numbers this morning. Jalen Green in 6 games since the Rockets started going through Sengun, his true shooting percentage is over 58%. So on top of the raw numbers, scoring more than 28 per game on strong efficiency, he's getting to the line, he's shooting threes and making them at nearly 40% on high volume. It's helped the Rockets in a number of ways. And of course, Sengun over that stretch in his last 6 games, also from Nathan Fogg, 21 points, nearly 11 rebounds, nearly 7 assists. Last night, he had 21, 7, and 7, and it felt like it was almost a bad game for him. He had some turnovers late, which he called bullshit. It was pretty hilarious in his post-game interview. And, of course, we're all focused on Jalen because of the 42. But the point is he had 21, 7, and 7 last night, and that felt almost like a ho-hum game. Sengun's been putting up, again, 20, 10, and, nearly 7 assists, basically a Sabonis light. And he's been doing it with ease. It feels like, again, a game like last night, he wasn't even close to the storyline, and he was super efficient and putting up big numbers. And again, it's not like it's coming in a super losing environment. Now, it took until last night to actually win, but again, they've been within single digits the 3 prior games. We talked in our previous show late last week about the on-off splits, which have shown the Rockets being clearly superior with Alperen Sengun on the floor. So again, the stuff that he's doing is translating to a better team environment. It might not directly translate to wins a lot because this team is bad and they're really young, but it is absolutely contributing to the success of not just Sengun individually, but the team as well. And so, yeah, it is going to be a test when Kevin Porter Jr. comes back. They're going to reevaluate him later this week. And yeah, I think I'm at a point now where you've got to consider radically transforming your approach on offense to stick with the Sengun as a hub approach. Before this recent stretch, I was open to it. I also think Kevin Porter Jr. got a bit of an unfair shake from people who were trying to pin too many things on him. But for me, it's not just Sengun individually. It's what his emergence has done for the players around him, most notably Jalen Green, who's the most important asset in your entire organization. And so when you look at it not just through the lens of Sengun versus KPJ, who has the most touches, but you also look at it in terms of what is best optimizing the rest of your young core, most notably Jalen Green, who, as I've said many times, is the most important asset in your organization. His development, his growth, his progression is by far the most important thing that you're going to take out of this season. The fact that to this point, there does seem to be a correlation between greater Sengun usage and a better version of Jalen Green, to me, that makes it pretty clear that even when KPJ comes back, this offense needs to stick with the formula of the last couple of weeks. And again, that's not saying kick KPJ to the curb. No, not at all. He absolutely has gifts as a catch and shoot guy, as an off-ball player, as you were saying. Defensively, when he actually tries, he's 6'6", he's long, he has good instincts, he can cover multiple positions. He still has a role. And even though it's not their skill set, they do need to play faster. There are going to be some games where you do need a perimeter guy to just go get a bucket. You did make a fair point on Sengun actually being their best isolation player. It's just tougher the way they're playing right now to give him the ball in those settings. There are some times when KPJ sort of is a late game takeover, even though it's not the way they should play. It's not to their skill set. There are going to be some times that you need that to win a game. There is still a role for KPJ. It's just a different one. And I think this stretch, unless there's something dramatic, and quite frankly, even if there is a dramatic turnaround in terms of Sengun playing poorly the next couple of games, it sounds like there's going to be at least 2 more without KPJ, and probably much more than that, because I think he gets reevaluated on Friday. There's 2 more games, Wednesday against Washington, Thursday against Cleveland. And then because it's been 2.5 weeks, even if he gets cleared Friday to, I guess, resume physical activities, I don't think they would play him Saturday in Detroit. I think there'd be a ramping up period of at least a few days with Jae'Sean Tate, for example. Now, I know Tate's ankle injury was more severe than Porter's foot, at least that we know to this point. But Stephen Silas mentioned postgame last night, they're still trying to keep Tate around 20 minutes per game coming off those ankle issues. So I think with a foot and ankle, with a sport like the NBA, my guess is until the All-Star break, when you give Porter a good week off his feet, even if he returns, his minutes are likely to be a bit limited. And so that makes the case even stronger to just keep running everything through Sengun for the time being, right? And just, even if things go worse, you can evaluate and use that as a data point. We've talked about that before. You need to get more data in a season like this, see how guys perform in different contexts. You're seeing how they perform with Sengun as the hub. And for a lot of these guys, most notably Jalen Green, they're responding well to that.
Yeah, and speaking of Sengun, right, there's a couple more stats that I would like to point out. He is, over the last 7 games, averaging nearly a steal and a half and a block and a half per game. He has multiple 4-block games or 4-steal games. It's, it's encouraging. Once again, defense is not highlights. Defense is consistent effort rather than the one play where you do get a steal or a block. But that's interesting. He's also getting 11 rebounds a game. He's also scoring 20 points a game on 68% field goal percentage. I'm not even going to pull, the true shooting, because when the field goal is that high, the true shooting can only be higher. And another interesting trend is over the last 7 games, he has taken 7 threes. And he has made them at a 70% clip. Yep. Is he a shooter? No, it still looks funky as hell, but it's encouraging that he's taking them. It's encouraging that he's
spacing.
Yeah, and it's encouraging that he's showing some touch on them. I think he took a step back three as well, which was at the end of the shot clock, of course. But
yeah. One of the interesting things, by the way, he seems to be really comfortable with those threes from the wing spots, which is super useful because it's not like, a lot of infrequent 3-point shooters, they specialize out of the corners because, it's a slightly shorter and simpler shot. But the fact that he's actually be able to make them from the wings is super useful because that's close to where he operates out of the high post anyway. And so his ability to make that shot, not just again from the corners, but from the wings, that's actually really important because if he can, even if it's just one early in a game, like we've seen the last couple of games, that makes that defender have to step out, the man covering him, a couple extra steps potentially to account for his ability to take that shot. Now, I know he has a very slow release. It looks ugly, as you were saying, but his willingness to take it and his ability to make them on occasion, just the fact that you plant that in the defender's mind, that's pretty big with making him come out a couple extra steps and perhaps opening up the driving lanes for guys like Jalen Green and Tari Eason.
And even for himself,
That too,
when attacking a closeout, he is fairly strong on the drive for a center. He
you talk about him as an isolation guy.
He puts his shoulder into the opposing centers, and he does draw a foul or makes up the flips when he's attacking closeouts, or even when he is taking players off the dribble. Last night there was a specific example of the possession right after he made the three. Gobert stepped up to him, and it led to an advantage being created. The other thing that I was going to mention was the fact that he is showing us a new shot, the little shot put. That's just so intriguing because you never see that shot. But it's at the same time so important because he has a size disadvantage and he does struggle against, bigger players, Mitchell Robinson, even Rudy Gobert himself. That shot put, being able to completely avoid and completely nullify the shot blocker when they're playing drop and when they're right under the basket, is huge, both from a pick and roll perspective and from a just finishing at the rim perspective in any situation. Because how many times have we seen Sengun won't roll really hard to the rim because he's not a lob threat, and so what he'll do is he'll hover around the free throw line or a little bit further ahead, so he has space to catch the ball. And we've seen Jalen Green himself most of the time make that pass, that wraparound pass around his defender to Sengun, and Sengun just goes for the slow little shot put that he's developing.
It's also very useful against a guy like Gobert because, of course, we all love the Sengun post moves, which are pretty sick, but against a guy like Gobert, it's tougher to get the separation to go to his typical jump hook, the drop step. There's just much more of a presence and length. So the fact that he can score in non-traditional ways, the fact that he can drop that in from, not just the typical range, occasionally, you'll see it in the NBA in like the 6 to 8 foot range. Dude, we've seen Sengun do it all the way out to like 10, 12 feet. It just makes him much more well-rounded when he's going up against a very long and more physical big like a Gobert. It just makes his toolbox all the more diverse.
Yeah, and it's been a very efficient shot for him as well. He seems to have really good touch on it. He has good touch in general around the rim, but it's definitely something.
Sometimes you can't get to the rim. Yeah, sometimes you can't get to the rim because of a guy like Gobert, and so it's super useful that he can do that.
Speaking of those little weird floaters, it's also interesting that he goes for them sometimes from just what usually is mid-range range, like from not nearly at the 3-point line, but halfway between the 3-point line and the free throw line. And besides him, Jalen Green is starting to do that as well, and he also has like a really, really good touch on them. I wonder if that's a development thing for the Rockets, because Jalen has the little fade away mid-range game that many scoring guards do. But he's also starting to, instead of just pulling up for the mid-range, sometimes going for these long floaters. I remember it stuck out to me right away at, I think, his first summer league game that he took one of them. And he's a guy with some insane shot-making skills. He just has a knack for placing the ball in the basket from any range. It's a special gift that not many players have. For example, Tari Eason, for example, he is terrible at that. He's terrible at making tough shots go in. It's interesting that both the franchise players or the franchise scorers on this team are starting to go to that little floater, which is a lot different from the floater we're used to seeing, which is the floater that KPJ also has. That's the old James Harden floater that he used to do to confuse teams between the lob to Kyle and the little floater that he had. So that's definitely something that to watch out for. But to transition from Sengun to Tari Eason, which I think is the next player we really need to talk about. In his 2 starts, he's looked amazing. I think he had 6 stocks last night. We know how active he is on the ball. I wanted to bring up something for discussion. Stanford KP on Twitter, who we've had on the podcast, brought up a very interesting point. Let me try and read the tweet outright just so I don't mess it up. He mentions I think a player like Tari, long, that can guard point of attack, adds rebounding, needs to start and pay attention to these names: Jalen, Sengun, Jabari, and KJ. If you embrace the 2-man game as the foundation of the starting lineup between Jalen and Sengun, then KPJ can become a super sub. I think that's really interesting. That's a way of forcing those offense to run through Sengun naturally. That also plays to the advantages that you were bringing up earlier of this team plays well or better when they play fast. And having the 2-man game between Jalen and Sengun is very much a half-court thing. And so you still have that component. You're still able to run half-court sets. But at the same time, you're playing Jalen, KJ, and Tari Eason, who are 3 speed demons that are going to run up and down the floor, and they're going to try and cause turnovers. More so KJ and Tari Eason when it comes to the turnovers thing. I think that's really interesting. Not only because of the effects on the floor, but also because, one, you're likely not going to be starting KPJ at point guard next season. I mean, I would call it a very remote chance. So you're acclimating him to that role, and in his head, he's not going to be, you don't run a risk of him pinning that decision on whatever player comes in, whether that is James Harden or Scoot Henderson, because that could be contentious. If you start cooking with that idea a little bit earlier on, that might be good. And besides that, it makes it a lot easier. And we made this argument when Sengun was coming off the bench to begin the season. If the goal is to have one of KPJ, Jalen, or Sengun on the floor at all times, which are the 3 main shot creators, it's a lot easier to stagger them if one of them is coming off the bench, just from a rotation standpoint. So I think it's a really interesting point. In this lineup that KP is bringing up, Jalen is the quote-unquote point guard, but the offense runs through his 2-man game with Sengun. And then you actually don't run a shooting guard. You run run a series of guys who can guard point of attack, who are switchable in KJ, Tari Eason, and Jabari Smith when he comes back. I'm really intrigued by that, and I don't think they will experiment with it, but I think that would be a really interesting idea to toy around with.
Yeah, the Eason stats from last night, let's just put this in perspective. We all love to focus on the layups that he misses because they're so frustrating. But even with those, 11 points, 9 rebounds, 3 steals, 2 blocks in 26 minutes, and he's doing it as a starter. That is so important to underscore because it's very easy for a rookie that comes in off the bench playing against backups. The stats can look good in limited playing time, but then are they scalable? That's a big question. Are they going to hold up when he's going up against the best players on opposing teams and not just friendly matchups that perhaps play well to his skill set, and this idea that you can just turn him loose, a guy with a high motor like Tari Eason, in a 16, 18 minutes per game role. The fact that he's able to continue this level of play with higher minutes and against starters, that is so encouraging. And the question that I have for you, Paolo, I'll turn it back around. Does this perhaps make you more open to looking at trades, maybe not trying to trade, but at least exploring the market for some of your other forwards like Jayshawn Tate and KJ Martin, who might have a market for them? We've talked about a potential Eric Gordon trade for some time, and I think we're both in alignment on that. You have to look at this deadline to moving him unless you're given some reason to believe that there's a very tight correlation between Eric Gordon and James Harden. And if that's the case, maybe you just grin and bear it. But Eric Gordon, moving him to sort of help your rotation crunch, We've talked about that for months. That feels inevitable. And the fact that Garrison Matthews is suddenly looking a bit more playable, that only makes it even easier to potentially move Eric Gordon without it really hurting you that much in terms of what his role is on this particular team. But you could also argue, keep in mind that Tari Eason is in this role now because Jabari Smith Jr. is out with an ankle sprain. It's considered minor. He is trending in the right direction. He was questionable last night, which tells you that he's pretty damn close. If he hasn't come back on Wednesday, which he might not because it's a back-to-back, I would guess Thursday against the Cavaliers would be a pretty good bet for Jabari. Those minutes are going to be at a premium even if you trade Eric Gordon. Again, you're going to have Kevin Porter Jr. coming back in the relatively near future as well. And it's not going to be easy to give Tari Eason the minutes that I think a lot of people would like to see, especially with his production continuing to scale. And of course, Jae'Sean Tate right now is limited to about 20 minutes per game. Assuming his ankle continues to respond as they hope, he's going to warrant more minutes than that as well. So the Eric Gordon trade, we've talked about that a ton. There's no reason to go into that again. Everybody knows the dynamics there. You can just look in our archives if you want more talk about that. But does the fact that Tari Eason is proving so intriguing at such a young age, and the fact that his production is scalable, does it make you maybe just a little curious about what the market might be for Jae'Sean Tate or KJ Martin and exploring what you could do on those fronts prior to the February 9th trade deadline?
That's really interesting, and that's a really nuanced question because we have 4 wings in KJ, Tari, Jabari, and Tate, and they all bring very specific different things.
And keep in mind, by the way, before you go into that, we're also talking about whether it happens this season or next season, eventually throwing KPJ into that wing mix as well a bit more based on the Sengun hub offense, potentially bringing in a point guard. So in the long run, when you're talking about building out this roster, you could potentially be throwing KPJ into that mix as well.
Yeah, that's interesting because maybe if you bring in another point guard, I would still view KPJ, and this will tie into the wing discussion. I would still view KPJ as the backup point, kind of, or backup shooting guard.
Yeah, he's not an apples to apples, but he could potentially eat into the minutes. I guess that's where I was going.
Exactly.
With that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not the same role, but yeah.
It's still a good point because right now, a lot of Jae'Sean Tate's minutes aren't as a wing. They are as the backup point guard. And so if you're bringing in another point guard to be the starter and slotting KPJ to the bench, then perhaps Jae'Sean Tate's the one that's left out, which is tough because we can see the difference he makes on this team. And I think a big part of that is the fact that he's willing to push the pace and be decisive and bully his way and force dribble penetration and then be willing to make the pass afterwards. That becomes less necessary if you bring in a point guard. That being said, you also need to bring in a point guard that's going to be willing to do the push the pace thing, because it's not all point guards that are going to just be running up and down the floor every single time. And let's say it's James Harden. James Harden's not someone like that. James Harden is much more of a half-court player. And if you bring in James Harden and you slot KPJ to the backup point guard, KPJ is also not one of those guys. And so if you trade Jae'Sean Tate now, you're lacking a ball handler that will do those things and then will push the pace, which is so important for this team. Although we often talk about the Jalen Green fit with Harden and Sengun. And in theory, in the half court, it makes sense. But from a pace of the game standpoint, it's really not that great because Jalen wants to run. And Harden can feed someone who wants to run. We've seen it with Daniel House multiple times. Even Ben McLemore would get plenty of just leak out easy baskets. Maybe that still works. But both James Harden and Alperen Sengun are better, or the bread and butter is the half-court game. So it's tough to have it be Jae'Sean Tate, but maybe with a better team with more vets till next year, a lot of what Jae'Sean Tate brings becomes less valuable. So perhaps I think Jae'Sean Tate would be my first option to move, just because, as I was saying, they bring such different things. Jabari Smith is supposed to be, he's not yet, but he's supposed to be a 1-5 switchable sharpshooter that's going to provide help at the rim. Tari Eason is more of a point of attack, more of an inside scorer, even though he's shooting better than Jabari right now. He's more of a, I think he's a better offensive rebounder. He's more similar to Jabari, but not quite the same thing. And then you have KJ Martin, who's just an off-ball threat all the time. Out of all of these guys, none of them are lob threats, and KJ Martin is the only one that is. KJ Martin also has the best chemistry with Alperen Sengun and knowing when to cut. That's also another. It's hard to teach those things.
He's also Jalen Green's best friend on the team, which it probably has some value on some level. Let's be honest.
It does. And another thing that I want to bring up about him that it's not quite a characteristic, but he mentioned, just as a shout out to him, he mentioned on an interview with Danielle. Danielle.
Danielle
I'm trying.
Lerner.
Okay, I didn't want to mess up the name. Danielle Lerner, to the Houston Chronicle, where he says, "I feel like we're going down the court to try to make it too difficult. We've got LP who can facilitate. Give it the ball to LP and move off of him, and I feel like everything will be easier after that." So he has the understanding of how the offense should be run. And there's multiple quotes on this article. I recommend that you go read it, where they talk about him just on the day-to-day, talking to the young guys, especially the rookies, saying that working with them through the rod of losing and staying with it and staying hardworking. That's a guy you want to keep around, both from an on-the-court perspective and an off-the-court perspective. So it becomes interesting because you can only have 4 wings, and all of these guys seem to be too good for any of them to just be the backup, unless you're running a wing rotation that's really high intensity, and you're running them all of them 25 minutes a game rather than one playing 30 and the one playing 18. The other one's playing 18. You could have just a wing platoon of guys that are playing 24 to 26 minutes a game. You play more the guy that's playing better on the night. But that's, while we figure out who are the best guys. My range would probably be, the first one I would trade is probably Jason, just because a lot of his skill sets are going to have to come from whatever point guard you end up signing.
The other thing with Tate that makes me more inclined to explore his market, I think the Rockets, from a value perspective, Tate, because of the contract stability, even though he's older, I think you can make a case that he may have more value on the market. Number one, he's clearly better defensively, which a lot of immediate title contenders are likely to prioritize. And secondly, because of the contract stability, the super team-friendly terms that Rafael Stone negotiated last summer, that's something that's going to have a lot of value. Whereas with KJ, there's going to be the big question, because be it this summer or next summer, the fact that you don't know at the time of the trade whether you're going to come to an agreement with KJ and his reps on a contract and what exactly that's going to look like, that might depress his value a little bit. Also, the Rockets, because of their huge amount of cap space this summer, that may not be as daunting to them. For example, even if KJ Martin wants a bigger deal than Jae'Sean Tate, the Rockets, because of all the cap room, you can do some creative things. Like, you could conceivably front load KJ's deal to an extent, to where it's basically a declining scale, to where he gets more next year or something, because you have all this cap room, and then you make it more friendly as the deal moves along. So the Rockets, their cap room, they can be more creative, and Tate, with the contract stability and the defense, might have more value elsewhere around the league anyway, even though he's older.
Yeah, but I think regardless of what it is, unless you get an outlier, like a really good offer, and I know people always criticize them for taking things too slow. If Tate's the guy or KJ's the guy, because of their locker room presence, I would not move them until I can bring in some other vets, or not other vets, but some vets.
Yeah,
that can kind of replace that, because we've seen how low this team can get just emotionally this season, and will continue to be as long as Steven Silas is here, because for reasons we've discussed prior.
And if a checked out Eric Gordon is the only vet, that might not be good.
Exactly. So keeping them around, even if it's just to keep the team afloat a little bit emotionally, is very important, because we always think we've seen rock bottom, and then a new rock bottom arises, and it gets frustrating.
Well, let's be hopeful that this is actually the rock bottom. I guess the good way to sum it up: explore the market, but don't actually act unless either the value is really, really good, or perhaps, it's in combination with other moves that bring you veterans that can sort of replace their presence.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode. Covered a lot of ground. Of course, we made this very Jalen Green centric, because his upturn, even though it's still a relatively small sample, just his last 6 games, any upturn by Jalen Green is, in the macro, in the big picture, as important as it gets with this franchise, even as important as the lottery pick that you're going to get this year. That's, to bring this full circle, that's where I think a win like last night is so encouraging. It's not empty at all. To win on the back of Jalen Green, that has a ton of value as well. And if they somehow continue to do that, those are the wins that you can live with, even if those two teams, Charlotte and Detroit, that are within a game and a half of you for the top lottery spot, which means it doesn't impact your odds at Victor or Scoot, but potentially it could lower your floor from 5 to 6 or 7, depending on how the lottery shakes out. Those are the types of things that you're okay with, that slight hit, if you're getting those wins on the back of Jalen Green developing and getting better as a player, as an asset, and of course the guy that you're trying to build this generation of Houston Rockets basketball around. So it's a win like last night. That's a good win. That's something that I think, no matter your perspective on draft picks, tanking, the value of this season, I think that's something that we can be excited about across the board. And of course, that's why we want to talk about it a lot on today's episode of The Logger Line. Anyway, with that, we'll draw things to a close. Paolo, thank you so much for the time. Any last words before we sign off?
Yeah, I'll just point out that I forgot earlier in the pod that really interesting that Jalen Green seems to pop off when somebody lights a fire under him. So it's really encouraging for next season when we eventually get a coach that does that every single game, because he has an extra gear and a big part of.
And when you inevitably get more veterans to get into a more competitive environment day in, day out.
Yeah, it really makes you think that he clearly has an extra gear, and if he can go get to that, if he can, know how to get himself into that extra gear eventually, that's where you see the superstar flashes, because he scored 42 points last night, and it looks so effortless to him. Yeah. So it's just more of an optimistic outlook into the future, because if you're building around Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green, you still have likely a top 5 pick in next year's draft coming in. If it is one of Scoot or Wemby, insane. And you still have, and then the other highly touted prospects that you do have are guys that fit within that system, or within that context of guys that are ball dominant, because Jabari Smith is not, Tari Eason is not, KJ Martin is not, even Ty Washington, if he becomes something on this team, he's also a guy that can easily play off the ball. So, and one last thing, can we please go away from running 3 centers or from playing players for 2 or 3 minutes?
The Usman Garuba 2-minute cameo last night, what the hell?
Or even Josh Christopher, like
that too. The 4 minutes, yeah.
Just pick one of Josh Christopher or Ty Washington and play them for the full 15, 16 minutes of the backup minutes. With Garuba, you shouldn't even have to pick. It should be Garuba over Bruno Fernando, because first of all, he played awful. Second of all, you don't even have the long threat argument, because I mentioned this to Matt Moore yesterday. Jalen Green has a total of 5 assists to Bruno Fernando and 40-something assists to Alperen Sengun. So the lob threat's not for Jalen. KPJ is not playing.
Yeah.
You should just go with Garuba all the time for the backup minutes and pick between one of Ty or Josh for an extended period of time, because it's tougher for players to get in a rhythm if they play 3 minutes and then 10 and then doesn't play and then 3 minutes again. It's really hard.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up by saying it's good to actually have a reason to talk about the micro for a change. Really, the last month or so, we've had so many macro, big picture focused episodes because in large part, the micro has been so depressing. The fact that there's actually some bright spots, the team becoming more competitive, and then Monday against the Timberwolves finally getting a win. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. There's things within the rotation. There's things within the style of play on the court that can be improved for sure. I don't think anybody's saying give Steven Silas a coach of the year vote by any means, but just the fact that there's enough bright spots that we can actually care about the micro again and actually get excited enough to talk about it. We're still watching the games, but of course, as recently as a week or so ago, it was depressing to even go into the game in, game out analysis. Just the fact that we're seeing enough hope to actually care about the micro again, that's something that we hope continues going into the second half of this season. I like what Stanford KP pointed out on Twitter last night, that in his eyes, this is potentially the true bottoming out. I hope that's the case, because there's possibilities, if that's what ends up happening, for more bright spots over the final 35 games or so. And then, of course, as we transition to next season with all the cap room, another draft pick, hopefully things are much better next year than they are right now. So with that, we'll draw this to a close. Again, for Paulo Alves, our co-host and producer out of Portugal, I'm Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team. If you want more content before our next episode in a week or so, the best place to get it is on Twitter. Paolo is on there at Paolo Alves NBA. I'm on there at Ben Dubose, and the show is on there at The Logger Line. If you go to The Logger Line on Twitter, you can find the show's link tree, which is where you can find really all the information you need regarding us, our partners, our sponsors. You want to learn more about Karbach Brewing and Clutch City Lager. You want to learn more about Sports Talk 790, access their content, Rockets Wire, just go to our link tree. You can find links to that, along with various distributors, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you want to listen to this podcast, you should be able to find it. Just search for The Logger Line. But another way you can do it, just simply go to our link tree, and you can find many of those links right there, along with content from our partners and sponsors. With those plugs out of the way, we will wrap up. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.